I'm Jonathan, 28 male. I live alone in a modest but comfortable apartment in a city far from my hometown, and I work as a financial analyst. My life is built on a foundation of careful planning and fiscal responsibility, principles I had to teach myself. For years, I believed that this discipline was the key to earning my family's respect, but I was about to learn that in their eyes, I was just a safety net they intended to cut without a second thought. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. In my family, there were two sons, but only one ever seemed to shine. My older brother Daniel was the brilliant, blazing star around which my parents Richard and Carol orbited. I was the other one, a distant, quiet planet noted for my predictable path but rarely marveled at. Daniel was 5 years my senior, and for as long as I could remember, he was the embodiment of potential. He was the charismatic dreamer, the one with vision. His report cards were a patchwork of dazzling A's in subjects that interested him and dismal D's in those that didn't, which my parents interpreted as the hallmark of a restless genius. My straight A's, earned through meticulous effort, were met with a simple nod and an "of course, Jonathan, that's what you do." My father, Richard, a retired construction manager, saw a reflection of his own unrealized ambitions in Daniel. Dad had always talked about starting his own company, a dream that got buried under mortgages and the responsibilities of fatherhood. In Daniel, he saw a second chance. My mother, Carol, was the chief enabler. She believed Daniel was destined for greatness, and any failure or misstep was simply a learning experience on his path to success. They viewed his risks as bold investments in a future that would benefit them all. My stability, on the other hand, was seen not as an asset but as a given, a utility, like electricity or running water, that was expected to be there but was never praised. This dynamic was never more apparent than when it came to money. I worked my way through college, juggling part-time jobs with a full course load. I applied for every scholarship I could find and took out federal student loans to cover the rest. I graduated with honors and a mountain of debt, a reality I accepted as my own responsibility. I created a spreadsheet the day after graduation, mapping out a 5-year plan to pay it all off. I lived frugally, drove a 10-year-old car, and packed my lunch every single day. For me, financial freedom was a goal to be earned through sacrifice and discipline. For Daniel, money was something that simply appeared when he needed it. His first car was a gift. His university tuition was paid in full from my parents' savings. When he decided to drop out halfway through his degree to find himself by backpacking through Southeast Asia, they funded that too. Each of his failed ventures, the artisanal coffee pop-up, the app that was supposed to be the next Uber for dog walkers, the bespoke surfboard business despite us living in a landlocked state, was bankrolled by the endless generosity of mom and dad. They called it seed money. I called it setting a bonfire with their retirement fund. The breaking point for me, the moment the quiet resentment I'd harbored for years began to harden into something colder, came about a year before everything truly imploded. I was on the home stretch with my student loans. I had been making aggressive extra payments and was down to my last $4,000. It was a huge milestone for me. I had a small bonus coming from work, but it wouldn't arrive for another 2 months. I calculated that if I could just get a little help, I could be completely debt-free before my 27th birthday. I called my parents, my stomach churning with a nervousness I hated. I never asked for anything. I rehearsed my speech, making sure I didn't sound entitled or demanding. I explained my situation clearly and calmly. So, I concluded, my voice tight, "I was wondering if you could possibly lend me $2,000. I could pay you back in 2 months as soon as my bonus comes through. It would just feel amazing to finally close this chapter." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. Then my father cleared his throat. "Jonathan," he began, his tone dripping with the weary disappointment he usually reserved for a leaky faucet or a bad report card, "you're a financial analyst. You, of all people, should understand the importance of living within your means." I was stunned into silence. He was lecturing me. "Your mother and I are proud that you've been so responsible with your loans," he continued, completely missing the irony. "But dependency is a trap. We help Daniel because his ventures are investments. Your student debt is a personal responsibility. You need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. It builds character." My mother chimed in, her voice soft but carrying the same message. "He's right, honey. It will feel so much better when you know you did it all by yourself. We have to be careful with our money now that your father is retired." Be careful with their money, I almost laughed. I thought of the $20,000 they had given Daniel for his surfboard business, the equipment now gathering dust in their garage. I thought of the countless times they'd covered his rent when a deal fell through. I wanted to scream to list every single financial discrepancy, every blatant act of favoritism that had defined our lives. But I didn't. What was the point? They lived in a different reality, one where Daniel's gambles were investments, and my responsible request for a short-term loan was a sign of dependency. I see, I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. You're right, it was a mistake to ask, I'll handle it myself. That's our boy, my father said, completely oblivious to the ice in my veins. Always so sensible. I hung up the phone, a profound sense of finality washing over me. The invisible wall between me and my family, which had been under construction for years, was now complete. I wasn't just the second-place son, I was the emergency fund they never planned on using. I went back to my spreadsheet, recalculated my budget, and figured out how to make it work. I sold some old textbooks, canceled my streaming services, and ate rice and beans for 2 months. I made that final payment on my own, and when the confirmation email arrived declaring me debt-free, I didn't feel the elation I had expected. I just felt a quiet, lonely resolve. I had learned the lesson my father intended, just not in the way he thought. I learned that I was and always would be completely on my own. It was a harsh lesson, but it would soon become the very thing that saved me. The character it built was not one of patience or forgiveness, but of cold, hard self-preservation. About 6 months after the phone call that severed the last thread of my emotional reliance on my parents, Daniel announced his magnum opus. It was always announced with theatrical flair, usually over a Sunday dinner that I was still expected to attend. This time he had gathered us all in the living room, a slick PowerPoint presentation loaded onto the television. He paced back and forth like a seasoned CEO, using buzzwords like disrupt, synergy, and paradigm shift. The new venture was called HiveMind, a ridiculously ambitious tech platform that aimed to integrate social media, project management, and e-commerce into one seamless user experience. It sounded like a Frankenstein's monster of existing technologies, with no clear revenue model or target audience. Daniel, however, spoke of it as if it were the second coming. He claimed to have a brilliant team of coders, 2 college kids he'd met at a coffee shop, and a vision that would make him the next tech billionaire. My parents were captivated. My father leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with pride, asking questions about market capitalization and IPOs, terms he'd clearly picked up from business news channels but didn't fully understand. My mother watched Daniel with an expression of pure adoration, as if he were single-handedly inventing the future. As a financial analyst, my mind was racing, but not with excitement. I saw a dozen red flags. The market was already saturated with similar, more established platforms. The development costs he projected were laughably low, and his revenue forecasts were pure fantasy, based on capturing a percentage of a multi-trillion-dollar market without any concrete strategy for user acquisition. When he finished his presentation with a dramatic flourish, my parents erupted in applause. "Daniel, that's incredible," my father boomed. "This is the one, I can feel it." "Oh, sweetie, we are so proud of you," my mother cooed, rushing to give him a hug. Then all eyes turned to me. "Well, Jonathan," my father prompted, "what do you think? Your brother could use the input of a numbers guy." I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. I didn't want to be the villain who crushed his brother's dream, but I couldn't just sit there and endorse a financial catastrophe. "It's ambitious, Daniel," I started. "The concept is broad. Have you done a detailed competitor analysis? What's your user acquisition cost model? The valuation seems premature without a working prototype or any pre-seed funding." The atmosphere in the room instantly chilled. Daniel's confident smile faltered, replaced by a defensive scowl. "It's a disruptive idea, Jonathan. You can't measure it with your boring spreadsheets. You have to see the big picture." "The big picture is made up of small details," I countered gently. "And financially, the details are what matter. A business plan needs tea." "Oh, be more than just a big idea." My father shot me a look that could curdle milk. "Give it a rest, Jonathan. We don't need your negativity. Daniel has passion and vision. That's worth more than any spreadsheet." "Richard's right," my mother added, her arm protectively around Daniel's shoulders. "You're always so critical. Why can't you just be supportive of your brother for once?" The conversation was over. I had been relegated to my usual role, the pragmatic, pessimistic killjoy. The rest of the dinner was strained. Daniel and my parents discussed the glorious future of HiveMind, pointedly excluding me from the conversation. I ate my meal in silence, the familiar feeling of being an outsider in my own family settling in my gut. A few weeks later, the other shoe dropped. My father called me, his voice bursting with an excitement I hadn't heard in years. "Great news, son, we did it." "Did what, Dad?" I asked, already dreading the answer. We're making Hive Mind happen. Your mother and I went to the bank with Daniel today. We're co-signing a business loan for him, $150,000, enough to get the platform built and launched. A cold dread washed over me. $150,000, Dad, that's a huge amount of money. What did you use for collateral? The house, of course, he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. You have to be willing to risk it all for your family's dreams. My family's dreams. He meant Daniel's dream. My dream had been to get a $2,000 loan to pay off the debt I'd incurred for my sensible education, and I'd been lectured on fiscal responsibility. Daniel's dream, a half-baked fantasy with no viable business plan, was worth betting their entire home on. The hypocrisy was so staggering it left me speechless. Dad, have you spoken to a financial advisor about this? I pleaded, my voice strained. This could put you in a very precarious position if the business fails. It won't fail, he cut me off, his voice hard. Not with our support, and frankly, Jonathan, I'm disappointed. I thought you'd be happy for your brother. This is a big moment for our family. Instead, you're just focused on the negatives. Daniel told us you would be like this. Of course he did. Daniel had preemptively framed my valid concerns as jealousy. It was a masterful move, one he'd been perfecting his entire life. He had inoculated our parents against the voice of reason. I just worry about you and Mom, I said quietly. Don't, he replied curtly. We know what we're doing. We're investing in a sure thing. Your brother is going to make us all proud. I knew then that there was nothing more I could say. They had made their choice. They had placed their bet, and it wasn't on the responsible son with a stable career and a proven track record of fiscal discipline. It was on the golden child, the charismatic dreamer to whom they had just handed a blank check, signed with their life savings and the roof over their heads. I hung up the phone feeling a profound sense of detachment. It was their money, their house, their decision. It had nothing to do with me. Or so I thought. I had no idea that in their blind devotion to Daniel's dream, they had already decided that my future, my name, and my hard-won stability were also acceptable collateral. They had already dragged me into the gamble, and I was about to find out that I was the one who would be forced to pay up when the house of cards inevitably came crashing down. The next 18 months passed in a blur of radio silence and strained pleasantries. I kept my distance from my family, limiting our interactions to brief, superficial phone calls on birthdays and holidays. I heard sporadic updates about HiveMind, mostly from my mother, who would gush about beta testing and user engagement metrics. From what I could piece together, Daniel had burned through the initial loan money at an alarming rate. He had rented a trendy office space with exposed brick walls, bought expensive ergonomic chairs, and spent a fortune on a marketing campaign before they even had a functioning product. I didn't offer my opinion, even when she told me they had taken out a second mortgage to inject another $50,000 into the company. It wasn't my place. I had been told in no uncertain terms to stay out of it, so I did. I focused on my career, earning a promotion and building a respectable investment portfolio. My life was a quiet island of order and predictability, and I guarded its shores fiercely. The first sign of trouble arrived not as a tidal wave but as a subtle shift in the tide. My mother's calls became less frequent, her tone less boastful. When I asked about HiveMind, she would give vague answers like, "Oh, you know, tech is a tough business," or "Daniel is working through some challenges." I knew what that meant. The dream was dying. I felt a pang of pity for my parents who had staked everything on my brother's whims, but it was overshadowed by a grim sense of validation. I had seen this coming. Then the wave hit. It was a dreary Tuesday afternoon. I was at my desk reviewing quarterly earnings reports when my phone buzzed with an email notification from my building's digital concierge. Certified letter for Jonathan, my last name, at front desk. Certified mail always set my teeth on edge. It was never good news. It was either a jury summons or something from the IRS. I finished my workday with a knot of anxiety in my stomach and went down to the lobby to retrieve it. The envelope was thick and official-looking, from a law firm I'd never heard of, Gable, Finch and Associates, representing Titan Commerce Bank. I took the elevator up to my apartment, my heart thumping a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I dropped my briefcase by the door and sat at my small dining table, staring at the envelope. I slid it open with a kitchen knife, my hand surprisingly steady. Inside was a sheaf of papers stapled together. The cover letter was dense with legal jargon, but certain phrases leaped out at me. Notice of default, immediate demand for payment, personal guarantor. I scanned the document, my confusion mounting. It was regarding a commercial loan issued to HiveMind Technologies, LLC. The outstanding balance was a number so large it seemed unreal, $212,458.37. I laughed, a short, sharp bark of disbelief. It was a mistake. They must have mixed up my records with my parents or Daniel's. I was Jonathan, the responsible one. I had never co-signed a loan in my life, let alone for my brother's doomed enterprise. I was about to toss the letter aside as a clerical error when my eyes caught the final page. It was a copy of the Personal Guarantee Agreement. This was the document a cosigner signs, pledging their own assets if the primary borrower defaults. At the top of the page were the names of the guarantors. There was my father's name, Richard, my mother's name, Carol, and then printed in stark black ink was my name, Jonathan. My blood ran cold. I stared at my name, printed on a line I had never seen, on a document I had never touched, and then I saw it. Next to my typed name in the space for the signature was a sloppy, looping scrawl that was a crude imitation of my handwriting. It was close enough to fool someone who wasn't paying attention, but to me it was as foreign as a foreign language. The J was too round. The tail of the N was too long. It was a forgery, a clumsy, arrogant forgery. I couldn't breathe. The air in my apartment felt thick and heavy like water. I read the document again and then a third time, praying that I was misunderstanding something, that I was having some kind of stress-induced hallucination. But the words remained the same. According to this legally binding document, I was personally on the hook for over $200,000 of my brother's failed business debt. A tidal wave of emotions crashed over me. Disbelief, confusion, and then a white-hot blinding rage that was so intense it made my vision swim. My mind raced back through the past 2 years. The phone call where my father lectured me on responsibility for a measly $2,000. The family dinner where my legitimate concerns were dismissed as negativity and jealousy. Their unwavering, idiotic faith in Daniel's grand plan. It all clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening snap. This wasn't a mistake. This was a deliberate act of betrayal. They hadn't just given Daniel a blank check, they had signed my name to it without my knowledge or consent. They had made me the ultimate backstop for their favorite son's failure. While I was meticulously managing my finances, living frugally, and building my life on a foundation of integrity, they had been gambling with my future behind my back. They saw my stability not as something to be respected, but as a resource to be plundered. I was the responsible son, so I could handle it. I was the numbers guy, so I would figure it out. The rage was quickly followed by a profound, chilling clarity. The family I thought I had, the one that was merely dysfunctional and favoritist, was gone. In its place was something far more sinister, a group of people who saw me not as a son or a brother, but as collateral. They had committed a felony, a serious financial crime, and put my entire life's work in jeopardy. The bank didn't care if the signature was forged. The legal burden of proof would be on me. To them, I was just another name on a defaulted loan, and they would come after me with the full force of their legal department. They would garnish my wages, seize my assets, and ruin my credit for a decade. I stood up, the papers trembling in my hand. The apartment, once my sanctuary of order, suddenly felt like a cage. The carefully constructed walls of my life were about to be torn down because of a signature that wasn't mine. The question of why was I? Are relevant, the only question that mattered now was what do I do? And as I stood there with the evidence of my family's ultimate betrayal in my hand, the quiet, responsible son began to disappear, replaced by someone they had never met, a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The fight wouldn't just be to clear my name, it would be a fight for justice, and I would make sure they paid for what they had done. For a few minutes, I just stood there in the center of my living room, the demand letter clutched in my fist. My first instinct was primal, to call my parents and scream, to demand an explanation, to unleash the torrent of fury and betrayal that was churning in my gut. I wanted to hear their voices, to force them to confess. But then a colder, more rational part of my brain took over, the part I'd honed through years of analyzing data and looking for patterns. Yelling would only give them a chance to coordinate their story, to gaslight me, to play the victim. It would be my word against theirs. I needed more than just a forged signature. I needed a fortress of irrefutable proof. My hand was shaking as I unlocked my phone, my thumb hovering over my father's contact number before I swiped away and found the one person I knew I could trust. Maya. Maya and I had been friends since college. We'd bonded in a brutal advanced economics class and had stayed close ever since. While I went into finance, she went to law school and had become a wickedly smart corporate lawyer. She answered on the second ring. "Jonathan, everything okay? You sound weird." "Maya, I need your help," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm in serious trouble and it's legal." I explained the situation, my voice cracking as I read her the details from the letter. I told her about the loan, my brother's failed company, and the forged signature. She listened patiently, without interruption, the silence on her end a comforting presence. When I finished, she didn't offer sympathy or outrage. She offered a plan. Okay, she said, her voice instantly shifting into professional lawyer mode. First things first. Do not, under any circumstances, contact your family. Don't call them, don't text them, don't email them. We operate under the assumption that they are hostile parties. From this moment on, you say nothing to them. Well, but... No buts, Jonathan. This is a crime scene and you don't call the suspects to let them know you're onto them. Second, do not contact the bank or the collections agency. Let me handle them. Any communication you have could be used against you. Forward me a scan of that entire package right now. I did as she said, my hands fumbling as I used my phone to scan each page and email them to her. The simple act of following her instructions calmed my racing heart. I wasn't alone in this anymore. Got it, she said a minute later. Okay, this is bad, but it's not hopeless. The burden of proof is on us to prove forgery, which can be tricky. We need to build a case. Your background as a financial analyst is going to be our biggest asset here. You know how to follow a paper trail. For the next week, my apartment transformed into a war room. Maya filed a formal notice with the bank's law firm, stating that I was disputing the validity of the debt on the grounds of identity theft and forgery, and that all future communication should be directed through her. This bought us time. Meanwhile, she tasked me with gathering evidence. My first objective was to prove I couldn't have physically signed the document. Maya requested the full original loan application package from the bank. When it arrived as a massive PDF file, I saw the date of the signing, October 14th, 2 years ago. My heart leaped. I immediately logged into my work email archive. I had been on a business trip that entire week. I pulled up my travel itinerary from my company's HR portal, flight confirmations, a hotel booking in Chicago, and expense reports for meals with clients from October 12th to the 15th. I had a digital, time-stamped alibi, placing me 1,000 miles away on the day my signature was supposedly put on that paper in my hometown. It was the cornerstone of our case. Next, I focused on the signature itself. Maya connected me with a forensic handwriting analyst she knew. I sent him dozens of samples of my real signature from different documents: my passport, my driver's license, old bank checks, my employment contract. A few days later, he sent back a preliminary report. It was damning. He identified over a dozen significant discrepancies between my actual signature and the one on the loan guarantee. He noted differences in pen pressure, stroke direction, letter formation, and slant. His professional opinion was clear. The signature on the guarantee document is a simulation, a freehand imitation of the genuine signature of Jonathan, my last name. It is highly probable that it was not written by him. While the forensic analysis was in progress, I did a deep dive into HiveMind Technologies LLC. Using public business registries, I found its official filing documents. The company was registered by Daniel, but the address was my parents' home. I dug into social media, looking at Daniel's old posts. I found photos of him celebrating the launch of his company, posing in his ridiculously expensive office. The dates on the photos correlated with huge drawdowns from the business loan, money that was clearly spent on aesthetics rather than product development. The most sickening discovery came from a detail Maya noticed in the loan documents. The application required the personal financial statements of all guarantors. There, attached to the file, was a statement for me. It listed my salary, which they would know, my savings, which they wildly overestimated, and my investment portfolio, a complete fabrication. It even included a forged copy of my signature authorizing the bank to pull my credit report. They hadn't just faked my signature on one page. They had built a complete, fraudulent financial profile for me to bolster the loan application. My father, who had once worked in construction management, would have known that a bank needed to see sufficient assets from its guarantors. My parents' house alone might not have been enough to secure such a large loan. They needed my income and my invented assets to get the deal approved. My good name and financial standing weren't just a safety net. They were the bait used to secure the loan in the first place. Every piece of evidence I uncovered felt like another twist of the knife. Each document, each date, each lie painted a clearer picture of the depth of their premeditated betrayal. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision made out of desperation. It was a calculated fraud. They had sat around a table, my father, my mother, and my brother, and decided to sacrifice my future for Daniel's fantasy. They had weighed my life's work against his latest whim and found mine wanting. By the end of 2 weeks, I had a binder 3 inches thick. It contained my travel records, the forensic handwriting analysis, printouts of Daniel's profligate spending, and the fraudulent financial statements they had submitted in my name. I sat with Maya in her office, the binder lying between us on her large mahogany desk. "This is more than I could have hoped for," she said, her expression grim but satisfied. We have a rock-solid case for getting your name off this loan. The bank will likely drop you as a guarantor once we present this just to avoid a lawsuit. Good, I said, my voice hard, but that's not enough. Maya looked at me, her gaze steady. What do you mean? Getting my name off the loan is just defense, I explained. It stops the bleeding, but it doesn't hold them accountable. They committed a crime. Bank fraud, identity theft, forgery. They tried to ruin my life. I want them to face the consequences of that. Maya leaned back in her chair, studying my face. She saw the cold resolve in my eyes. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about justice. Okay, Jonathan, she said slowly. We can do that, but you need to understand what you're asking for. This isn't just a lawsuit. This means filing a police report. This means a criminal investigation. If they are charged and convicted, your father, your mother, your brother, they could go to prison. I stared out the window at the city below. The thought of my parents behind bars was horrifying, but the thought of them getting away with this, of them facing no repercussions for their calculated destruction of my trust and my future, was worse. They had made their choice. Now I had to make mine. I understand, I said, turning back to face her. They built this house of lies. It's time someone burned it to the ground. The decision to escalate from a civil dispute to a criminal matter was a Rubicon to cross. Once I filed a police report, there would be no going back. The matter would be out of my hands and into the justice systems. For days, I wrestled with the enormity of it. My nights were sleepless, filled with the ghosts of 1,000 childhood memories. My dad teaching me to ride a bike, my mom reading me bedtime stories. Were those memories all a lie? Or had the people who created them simply vanished, replaced by the strangers who had forged my name? Maya was patient, giving me the space to process. She laid out the options like a surgeon presenting treatment paths. Option A was the civil route. We would present our mountain of evidence to Titan Commerce Bank. We would demonstrate beyond any reasonable doubt that I was a victim of forgery. The bank, faced with a potential lawsuit for failing to perform due diligence and the clear evidence of fraud, would almost certainly release me from the guarantee to mitigate their own liability. The debt would revert entirely to my parents, who had signed legitimate. Ely, they would likely lose their house and be financially ruined, but they would probably avoid jail time. It was a clean surgical strike that would save me but leave the perpetrators wounded, not vanquished. Option B was the nuclear option. We would do everything in option A, but we would also take the binder of evidence to the police and file a formal report for identity theft and forgery. This would trigger a criminal investigation. Bank fraud is a federal offense. A prosecutor would look at our evidence, the alibi, the forensic analysis, the fabricated financial documents, and likely press charges. My family would need criminal defense attorneys. They would face a trial. And if found guilty, they could face years in prison. For days, I was paralyzed by the choice. Option A felt like self-preservation. Option B felt like justice, but a brutal, familial form of it that I wasn't sure I could stomach. What tipped the scales was a simple, clarifying thought. If a stranger had done this to me, if a random thief had stolen my identity and saddled me with $200,000 in debt, I wouldn't hesitate for a second to pursue criminal charges. I would want them punished to the fullest extent of the law. Why was I hesitating now? Because they were family. The word family implies trust, loyalty, and protection. They had violated every tenet of that sacred bond. They had used my love and my trust as a weapon against me. Shielding them from the legal consequences of their actions wasn't an act of mercy, it was an act of enabling. It would send them the message that what they did was okay, that family ties were a get-out-of-jail-free card. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that if I let them get away with this, they would do it again, either to me or to someone else. Their moral compass was broken. The moment of decision came on a Thursday night. I was staring at the final student loan payment confirmation I had saved, the one I had worked so hard to make on my own after they'd lectured me about responsibility. That piece of paper represented my integrity, my work ethic, my entire belief system. The forged loan guarantee represented theirs. The two could not coexist. One had to be invalidated. I called Maya the next morning. It's option B, I said, my voice steady. We do it all. Are you sure? She asked one last time. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I replied. They need to learn that actions have consequences, especially actions that destroy lives. With that, the counteroffensive began. Maya drafted 2 sets of documents. The first was a thick, intimidating package addressed to the legal counsel for Titan Commerce Bank. It laid out our case in meticulous detail. It included my sworn affidavit, my travel records proving my alibi, the full report from the handwriting expert, and a formal demand that my name be immediately and irrevocably removed from the loan guarantee. It also hinted at a potential lawsuit against the bank for negligence in their verification process, a powerful incentive for them to cooperate quickly. The second set of documents was for the police. It was a concise, factual summary of the events, accompanied by the key pieces of evidence proving forgery and identity theft. Maya advised me to file the report in my own city, not my hometown. This would prevent any potential local bias and ensure the case was handled by a department that had no connection to my family. The day we set the plan in motion was surreal. I walked into the police station in my city, a place I had never set foot in before. I sat with a detective in a small, sterile room and walked him through the story. I presented the evidence binder. He was professional and detached, but as he looked through the pages, I saw his expression shift from procedural boredom to genuine interest. "This is one of the most well-documented fraud cases I've seen a civilian bring in," he commented, looking at the forensic report. He took my official statement, and when I signed it, I used the same pen I had used to sign my final student loan payment. It felt symbolic. He gave me a case number and told me a detective from the Economic Crimes Unit would be in touch. I walked out of the station into the bright sunlight, feeling not triumph but a heavy sense of gravity. The first domino had been pushed. The next step was to inform my family. Maya insisted that we, not the police or the bank, should be the ones to tell them what was coming. It was the only way to control the narrative and present our demands. We decided against a phone call which could devolve into a screaming match. We needed a formal, controlled confrontation, a meeting. I sent a single, terse email to my father, mother, and brother. The subject line was urgent family matter. The body of the email was simple. "I need to meet with the three of you to discuss a serious legal and financial issue. I will be at your house this Saturday. T 2 p.m. I will be bringing my legal counsel. Please ensure you are all present." The response was almost immediate. My mother called, her voice frantic with confusion and worry. I didn't answer. My father texted, demanding to know what was going on. I didn't reply. Daniel sent a long, rambling email speculating that I was in some kind of trouble and needed their help. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. For the next 3 days, I ignored their increasingly panicked attempts to contact me. I was following Maya's advice: maintain absolute silence, let them stew in their own anxiety. They had no idea what was coming, just as I'd had no idea when I opened that certified letter. They were about to learn what it felt like to have their world turned upside down without warning. Saturday couldn't come soon enough. The stage was set for the unveiling. The drive to my parents' house was the longest 3 hours of my life. Maya sat in the passenger seat, calm and composed, occasionally reviewing her notes. I, on the other hand, felt like my nerves were being stretched on a rack. This wasn't just a legal confrontation, it was the final, formal severing of my family. I was walking into that house as their son and brother for the last time. I would be walking out as their adversary. When we pulled into the driveway, I saw all three of them, Richard, Carol, and Daniel, waiting on the front porch. Their faces were a mixture of anxiety and annoyance. They looked like they were preparing to confront a misbehaving teenager, not a man who held their entire future in his hands. I took a deep breath, grabbed the evidence binder from the back seat, and walked with Maya to the front door. "Jonathan, what is the meaning of this?" my father started, his voice a low grumble. "Bringing a lawyer to our home." "Hello, Richard," Maya said coolly, extending a hand he didn't take. "I'm Maya. Perhaps we could continue this conversation inside." We walked past them into the living room, the same room where Daniel had pitched his hive mind fantasy. The air was thick with tension. We sat on the sofa opposite the three of them, who were now huddled together on two armchairs, a united front of denial. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I placed the thick binder on the coffee table between us with a heavy thud. "As I said in my email," I began, my voice colder and steadier than I expected, "we're here to discuss a serious legal and financial matter. Specifically, a defaulted commercial loan for $212,458.37 issued to HiveMind Technologies." I saw a flicker of panic in Daniel's eyes. My mother's face went pale. My father, however, held his ground, his expression hardening. "That's Daniel's business," he said dismissively. "It has nothing to do with you." "On the contrary," I said, opening the binder. "It has everything to do with me, because according to the bank, I am a personal guarantor on that loan." I slid a copy of the personal guarantee agreement across the table. I watched their faces as they looked at the page. My father's eyes darted to my forged signature and then quickly away. My mother refused to look at it at all. Daniel just stared, his mouth slightly agape. That's not possible," my mother stammered. "You were never involved." I know, I said. I was in Chicago on the day this was signed. I pushed a copy of my travel itinerary and expense reports across the table, which brings us to the signature. It's a forgery. I followed it with the 7-page report from the forensic handwriting analyst, complete with enlarged side-by-side comparisons of my real signature and the fake one. A very clumsy one at that. The room was utterly silent. The evidence was laid out before them, a brutal, undeniable testament to their crime. Daniel was the first to break. I didn't know, he whimpered, looking at our father. Dad said he was handling the paperwork. My father shot him a venomous look. Be quiet, Daniel. He turned his glare on me. All right, so there was a mistake with the paperwork. It was a stressful time. We can call the bank and sort it out. A mistake, Maya interjected, her voice sharp as glass. A mistake is a typo, Richard. What you did is a felony, several in fact, forgery, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit bank fraud. She let the words hang in the air, each one landing like a physical blow. My mother let out a small sob, burying her face in her hands. It gets worse, I continued, my voice relentless. I slid the fraudulent financial statement they had created for me across the table. You didn't just forge my signature. You fabricated my entire financial profile to secure the loan. You lied about my assets. You used my good credit history, a history I built through years of hard work and responsibility, to back your son's failing business. My father stood up, his face red with rage. We did it for the family, for Daniel's future. We knew you'd be negative and unsupport. So we did what we had to do. We were going to pay it all back. You were never supposed to find out. You did it for Daniel, I corrected him, my voice rising for the first time. Not the family. You lectured me about being responsible when I asked for a tiny loan to pay off my student debt I took on for my education. Then you turned around and committed a federal crime, betting my entire financial future on his pipe dream. Did you ever, for 1 second, think about what would happen to me when this loan defaulted? He had no answer. He just stood there, sputtering, his self-righteous anger deflating into pathetic denial. This wasn't a mistake, I said, my voice dropping to a low, intense calm. This was a choice. You chose to sacrifice me, and now I'm making my choice. Maya took over, her tone all business. Here is the situation, she said, addressing all three of them. As of yesterday, we have presented this evidence to Titan Commerce Bank and demanded Jonathan's immediate release from the guarantee. Their lawyers are reviewing it, and we expect them to comply to avoid a lawsuit. That will leave the entire debt with you, Richard and Carol. My parents stared at her, their faces ashen. The loss of their home was now a certainty. But that is not all, Maya continued. On Thursday, Jonathan filed a formal police report in his jurisdiction for identity theft and forgery. I have the case number right here. She placed a small card with the number on it on top of the binder. A detective from the Economic Crimes Unit will be contacting you shortly to begin their investigation. This was the moment, the unveiling of the final consequence. My mother looked up, her face streaked with tears. No, Jonathan, no, she pleaded. You can't, we're your family. You'd send your own parents to prison. You stopped being my family the moment you signed my name on that paper, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. You made that choice. This is the consequence. Daniel started sobbing openly. Please, Jonathan, I'll pay you back, I swear. I'll get a job, I'll do anything. It's too late for that, Daniel, I said. This is beyond money now. Maya stood up. We have presented you with the facts. Now we will present you with an offer. It is the only one you will receive. All eyes snapped to her. We cannot stop the criminal investigation. That is already in motion. However, how you cooperate with that investigation will significantly impact the outcome, and your cooperation with us will determine what happens next. She paused for effect. You will draft a full written confession signed by all three of you detailing exactly who did what, who forged the signature, who fabricated the financial statements, who knew about it. You will turn this confession over to us and to the police. You will also liquidate whatever assets are necessary to pay the bank's legal fees and any damages incurred by Jonathan. In exchange for your full cooperation, Jonathan will inform the prosecutor that he does not wish to see the maximum possible sentence imposed. It's not a guarantee of leniency, but it's the only mercy you're going to get. You have 48 hours to have your lawyer contact me with your decision, Maya concluded. If you refuse, we will withdraw the offer of support for leniency and release our evidence to the press. I'm sure the local news would be very interested in a story about a retired couple who committed fraud to fund their son's failed startup. We stood up to leave. As I walked to the door, my mother cried out my name. Jonathan, please don't do this to us. I stopped at the threshold but didn't turn around. "You did this to yourselves," I said quietly, and with that I walked out the door and didn't look back. The unveiling was complete. Their world of lies was now exposed to the harsh light of reality. The 48 hours after the confrontation were a strange, hollow silence. I expected a barrage of calls, texts, and emails pleading, threatening, or otherwise, but there was nothing. My phone remained quiet. It was the silence of a family in shock, their carefully constructed world shattered, trying to figure out how to piece together the wreckage. On Monday morning, precisely at 9:05 a.m., Maya received a call from a criminal defense attorney. He represented my father, mother, and brother. He informed her that his clients had agreed to our terms. They would cooperate fully. The fight was over. There would be no trial, no dramatic courtroom battle. Their surrender was absolute and unconditional. The months that followed were a grueling procession of legal procedures. True to their word, my family confessed. My father admitted to being the one who physically forged my signature, pressured by the need to get the loan approved. My mother admitted to knowing about it and helping to fabricate my financial statement. Daniel admitted to being aware of the plan and going along with it, believing I.T. was the only way to fund his dream. Their written confessions were a pathetic monument to their shared delusion and moral failure. The bank, faced with the overwhelming evidence and the signed confessions, quickly and quietly released me from the personal guarantee. They sent a formal letter confirming that I held zero liability for the defaulted loan. Holding that letter in my hands was one of the most liberating moments of my life. It was a legal document, but to me, it was a declaration of independence. My name was mine again. The criminal case proceeded as expected. Given their full cooperation, their confessions, and my statement to the prosecutor expressing a desire for rehabilitation over pure retribution, they avoided the harshest possible sentences. They pleaded guilty. My father, as the primary orchestrator, was sentenced to 2 years in a minimum security federal prison. My mother and Daniel received 5 years of probation, hefty fines, and 1,000 hours of community service each. The financial fallout was devastating for them. To pay the fines and the bank's legal fees, they had to sell the house I grew up in. They sold it at a loss in a down market, and after the debts were settled, they were left with almost nothing. They moved into a small, rented apartment on the other side of the state. My father's pension was now their only source of income. The grand legacy he had envisioned, built on the back of Daniel's success, had crumbled into dust. Daniel was forced to declare personal bankruptcy. His reputation was ruined. He couldn't get a job in the tech industry or any field that required a background check. The last I heard, he was working a manual labor job, the visionary CEO now humbled by the harsh reality of an honest day's work. I never spoke to any of them again. There were a few attempts, a letter from my mother filled with apologies and self-pity, an email from Daniel asking for forgiveness. I never responded. Forgiveness was a currency they hadn't earned. Trust, once shattered so completely, can never be fully rebuilt. My family, for all intents and purposes, was gone. The aftermath for me was quiet and transformative. I used some of my savings to cover Maya's legal fees, the best money I had ever spent. With the legal battle behind me, I felt a profound sense of peace. The constant weight of their expectations and disappointments, a burden I had carried my entire life, was finally lifted. I was free. I sold my old car and bought a new one. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine, paid for with money I had earned. I started traveling, visiting places I had always wanted to see. I reconnected with old friends and made new ones. I was no longer just the responsible son, I was just Jonathan, a man defined by his own choices, not by the role his family had assigned him.